The story of Dark Messiah began in France in 2004. Arcane Studios proposed the project to leading French editor Ubisoft, which would be based on the game experience of Arx Fatalis, a previous Arcane creation, and employ the source engine of Half-Life 2. This project mobilized some 80 people for 2.5 years, with developers from Arcane, Kuju, the English studio in charge of the multiplayer mode, and the people from Ubisoft. We propose that you discover this enormous team effort through the making of Dark Messiah.
We had a demo for our next game that we wanted to make back then with the Source engine, and we were shopping it around for every publisher. And Ubisoft had a good franchise called Might and Magic, and they were planning to make a game with it. And so it's really a nice encounter between two parties who had a common objective. We wanted to make a groundbreaking game with a lot of support and a nice budget, and they wanted to have a team which was able to do this kind of game. And when they saw the demo, that we just saw a perfect fit here.
The Might and Magic license is strong in the heart of the gamers, but when Ubisoft bought it, it was a dying license, except from the still very active Heroes of Might and Magic series, the strategy games. So our first step was to ask ourselves what we're going to do with this license. Of course, we'll do a Heroes game. Arcane came to us with this concept of a first-person action game using Half-Life 2 source engine and set in a fantasy world. And we said, hey, great, it's a perfect match for Might and Magic. We felt that there were some values that we wanted to inherit from the old Might and Magic games. For instance, the world split into different factions, the demons of the Inferno, the undead legions of the Necropolis, etc. The fact that it was a high fantasy game with strong epic elements. Players in the old Might and Magic games would play for hours, become very powerful, discover artifacts that had the power to really create or destroy the world. So we really want to keep that. There was also some moral ambiguity with the old Might and Magic games. You had the choice between good and evil. You were confronted with characters who were in shade of grey in terms of their morality. It's also something we wanted to keep. The Bible document that we created for this new world of Might and Magic is a growing document, a living document, in that it gives information to developers, but take information from them if they've got good insights or suggestions that we feel are good, etc. And also it was developed parallel to the development of the game, the production of the game itself. So it means Arcane had a lot of freedom at first, and the more we got deeper into the project and the more the Bible became official and written, of course the more set it was for them, and the more they had to follow it.
We paid a visit to the Arcane studio in Lyon, in the southeast of France, which developed the game for Ubisoft, to discover what goes on behind the scenes. Dark Messiah developers were confronted with many problems while creating the game. Here, some 60 people have been working exclusively on Dark Messiah for the past 2 years. When our team came to visit them, they were still working on the game. All teams, like level design, game design, art direction, etc., collaborate very closely in order to harmoniously respect production schedules. Arcane proposed to use the enhanced source engine to develop Dark Messiah. This high-performance engine is well known for both successfully integrating physics and creating a very fluid multiplayer mode. The engine was developed by Valve, an American studio based in Seattle. Built from scratch for an FPS, this engine very strongly influenced the development of Dark Messiah. But how did Arcane get the idea to use an enhanced source engine for its new game?
So the reason why we used the source engine was kind of an accident. Back a few years ago, when we released Arx Fatalis, we were showing the game at E3 for the Xbox, and Valve came to our booth and just to say hi and to tell us that they liked the game. A little later, we were starting our own engine for the next game, which was going to become Dark Messiah, and as we were doing this engine, we saw at the same time the demos coming out for Half-Life 2, and we were very impressed by that, of course. And we thought, hey, what let's try it. Let's contact the guys, and hopefully they'll remember us. And bingo, they were just very excited to let us use the engine, and not only excited, but they were supportive, and so that's how it worked out.
Source engine is really great engine to work with. I mean, if we have such visuals, we definitely owe it to this engine. I mean, the physics also. I mean, if we can really distinguish ourselves with this gameplay based around the physics, it's due to that engine. The integration of the physics within the tools we use makes it very easy for level designers to implement new traps, new interactive environments. It's not very complicated. So the barrier between the person who is making the game, or designer, and the engine is very small.
In Dark Messiah, we wanted to push the physics linked to the gameplay further than what they do in Half-Life 2. So we really created a lot of situations in which the player will have to interact with the environment and use the physics to get rid of numerous enemies, or trigger a certain trap, or unlock a secret door. This is the kind of mechanism we really insisted on having throughout the game.
Lines of action were put into practice by the people at Arcane.
The kind of shaders that they developed were very oriented towards realism, and this is exactly what we wanted to have. A very realistic feel, radiosity, so a lot of lights, and it's got a great animation system, and most of all the physics engine is fantastic. The way it's been integrated into the core of the engine is just so well done.
We intersected a lot of their engine's existing features, permitting us to create new chain reactions. For example, if I approach a source of fire and use it to light my arrow, and then I launch my flaming arrow at an NPC, and before I threw an oil jar at him and he's covered with oil, he'll catch fire and flee running, and so forth.
Also, we added a component that we call the physics of the elements. It's linked with the magic spells that the player can learn. It means that not only you have the physics of I can take a barrel, throw it, smash it, play with it, let it roll, etc. But also you play with fire, you play with ice, you play with lightning, you play with air with the telekinesis spell. For instance, with lightning, if you cast your lightning bolt in a creature who is standing in the water, it will amplify the damage as electricity would do in real life.
Successfully integrated physics is a major aspect of the Valve engine. It greatly enriches gameplay. Moreover, it allowed Arcane to make considerable graphic progress, pushing the engine to its extreme limits, and sometimes even further. For example, in terms of radiosity or light calculations in every scene, this engine makes the light calculations automatically, which saves a lot of time.
We technically recuperated all the map lights, which we reapplied to the game's textures. If I light up a room in blue, for example, that blue will also color the walls, and some blue tones will also appear on the ceiling. As with Half-Life, a very realistic photographic result was achieved. Even for our fantasy-like universe with illustrative textures, we've attained excellent management of the lighting.
And just how did Arcane manage to exploit an as yet unproven engine at the same time that its team started working on Dark Messiah?
We actually had access to the engine 6 months before the game came out, so it was, we had this beta, and of course it was a challenge to do a demo with an unfinished technology, but the code was already pretty stable, and so it was very exciting.
The challenge was to attain the level of the engine, while knowing our game would come out 2 years after them, which meant improving the graphic quality. The competition was impressed by what we achieved in Dark Messiah. It was challenging because, in comparison to the competition, we offer lengthy game levels with colossal architectures. I think we attained our objective in terms of both global graphic development and gameplay. We succeeded in making a universe function on an engine which, at the start, was ill-prepared for it.
Sur un moteur qui n'était pas prêt pour ça dès le début. C'est alors ça qui a impressionné Valve. Je pense qu'ils ont été étonnés.
This is what impressed Valve the most, I think. They were surprised that our little French team could take their baby so far.
Using this engine meant creating a specific type of game, for it was designed for an FPS. This choice seemed pretty ambitious in the heroic fantasy universe, but for Ubisoft the priority was the player's immersion in the game, well served by the FPS mode. Developers have enhanced this immersion through several tools: a rich environment, the creation of body awareness, and ambitious melee combat gameplay.
Arcane's concept was an FPS from the scratch because it used Half-Life 2 engine, but we supported it because we felt that one of the core values of the game is immersion, and immersion is allowed through different means in the game, but being in first person is one of those means. And it really helps you feel that you are part of this fantasy world, you are living the events that Sareth is living, experiencing, and you really feel like you belong into this world and not like you're just watching something as in a movie or in a classic video game from a third-person perspective.
Going to meet his dragon. Our duck will be pleased.
First of all, we had the objective of building a very highly simulated environment. So every object was to be in physics so that this would bring some more immersion. There's nothing more immersive than being able to grab any object around, like a chair or anything, and throw it in the environment and see what are the consequences for that. So if you see the AIs turning and going, so that's just cool.
Also, most of the important information is given in the course of the action. Very few scenes interrupt the game.
Most of the story is not told through cutscenes, but some of them were compulsory because they will convey critical information to the player, or they will allow us to show spectacular scenes that we couldn't do with the in-game engine on its own. But there are maybe like 7 cutscenes in the whole game, so it's not a lot. And most of the script information you'll have and that will lead you to experience the story is conveyed through in-game action and dialogues.
I'm the envoy from Master Fenrig, with a message for the wizard
Inside
Menelag.
with you. That's Lord Menelag. Got any proof? We're a little wary of strangers these days.
I have a letter of introduction.
Let me see it then.
To maximize the player's immersion, very close attention was paid to creating complete body awareness in Dark Messiah.
One of the game's great advantages is that we created total body awareness for the player. Body awareness is the capacity to watch the player's body at any moment. Traditionally, in many FPS, if the player bends his head, we don't see his feet. But here we can see his entire body, regardless of the armor, with which he can be equipped during the game. We can also witness his principal movements. When we walk, we can see the feet walking. If he bends down, we also see what he sees, stooping. This provides a much more realistic quality to the game. We're no longer a camera floating in the air, but we have an entire body that acts and reacts. Body awareness also lets us accentuate the player's implication and feeling when the player kills someone. We can both kill someone and pull back the weapon, but we also provide realism to when the player is struck. It's far more than an image that suddenly collapses, a camera shot that suddenly falls. When we take a hit, the player backs up, which allows us to surreptitiously see the body, our body, and so feel much more implicated in the action.
The melee combat style developed in Dark Messiah emphasizes sensation, feeling. But it wasn't easy for Arcane to reach such realistic results. Everything had to be synchronized and fit together.
The big problem with Dark Messiah was to feel this implication when we stab someone with a dagger or hit someone with a club. Because of being limited to a single fixed view of the scene, when we know that striking someone with a weapon involves a fair amount of movement.
On est limité à un champ de à peu près
we're limited to a range of vision of only about 90 degrees, so we had to cheat to get across the feeling of the attack. Normally, when we strike someone with a large sword, the body is carried forward. We couldn't achieve that, so we did it another way, with the strike of the sword well in front of the screen and adding another animation on the head of the player to accentuate the movement. The combination of the two should better transcribe the sensation of handling a real weapon. Some blows demanded more work than others, especially in terms of adapting to the technical constraints. The biggest problem with our game is to animate hand-to-hand combat, rarely done in video games, which means that the principal character should move in very close to the other characters. So we had to adapt some very realistic movements, composed and construed from the player's point of view. For example, stabbing someone in the back, which is generally not very realistic. So we tried to really give the impression of sneaking up on the victim and then stabbing him. It took a lot of miming, all the different possibilities. Can we strangle like that, like we hoped at the beginning, but is very impossible? We chose the best result visually speaking, catching hold of the victim and stabbing, which is of course less discreet than a really sudden and silent attack from behind, but provided the best results in terms of both gameplay and visual effect.
For the combat itself, that has been, we spent so many months trying to get it right. We started with all sort of strategies, like let's try to make it more tactical, or let's try to make it more immediate, very action-based, or let's try to make it based on context. And it took us a while to get like some kind of a beginning of something which was interesting. The reason why the end result is good is a combination of different things, and the quality of the animations really makes it up for it. Our lead animator happens to be a very good martial art guy, so that's just pure chance. You know, we're so lucky to have this guy with us.
Beyond the combat style proposed in Dark Messiah, the environment is essential to exciting gameplay. Many possibilities are offered to the player to interact with objects in the game. It's the level designer's job to assemble those mechanics to create the gameplay.
Le rôle du level designer, c'est en fait d'intégrer tous les outils.
The level designer's job is to integrate all the tools, or what we call the mechanics, into every level and environment of the game. For example, our game has several tools. You can push the enemy into the void, into fire. You can break things, climb up ropes. We use the environment as a weapon against our enemies.
Comme une arme, en gros, comme contre les ennemis. Et nous, on s'occupe.
The level designer takes care of integrating these systems into the levels of play. It's what we call the player of ordnance, a term invented by someone well respected at Arcane named Randy Smith, who came to help us out on the project. The player of ordnance means that when we supply a tool at the beginning of the game, we can no longer take it away, such as a barrel that can be broken. It has to be accessible throughout the game. We supply many tools at the start, and we have to make sure to use them. For the level designers and the animation artists, it was pretty tough to manage so many game tools.
Art direction constantly needed to work hand in hand with the gameplay coordinators. That was our challenge on Dark Messiah. The game levels passed from one hand to another between artistic pairs of modelers and texturists and someone from gameplay who oversaw the level. It was a constant game of ping-pong. If gameplay needed to fine-tune an episode or scene because they were too long, because events didn't successfully link up, or because two actions were occurring at the same time, for example, a Cyclops destroys a wall while a cannonball explodes a wall, the player cannot witness both. So we reworked the player's location or arrival on the scene to set off the events in their proper order.
We now better understand the great result that is Dark Messiah. But what were the main challenges during the game's development?
I mean, we started to have something that was working, But the system itself became so complicated that at some point we didn't really know what was wrong or what was right. So one phase which was very helpful for us was to bring in another guy, and he helped us working out on a vocabulary so that we could assign for every kind of concept we could assign a word. And then once we had this vocabulary in place, we could talk all the same language and define the combat with proper words instead of just saying, oh, you know, this cool thing when you nail the guy, and you know. So then we had some real words and some real concepts. And then the second really big challenge, of course, was to make the game multiplayer style compliant. As I said before, you know, you can play a mage with all sorts of spells, you can play a warrior and have a very direct frontal approach, or you can play an assassin and backstab people, or just you know, be sneaky and not being seen by monsters. And we had the objective to let the player do these objectives the way he wants. So we would reward the player on objectives, not on kills. And that was very hard, because imagine designing an environment which works for every kind of purpose. It's not that easy.
Well, congratulations, Arcane people. You did a great job. And we hope the gamers enjoy the improvements you propose in Dark Messiah gameplay. Now it's time to talk about the other developer involved in creating Dark Messiah, Kuju. Ubisoft wanted to create an outstanding multiplayer mode, as in every good FPS. And the English studio Kuju was charged with the development 1 year into the beginning of the project. On the occasion of the presentation of the multiplayer mode in Paris to the press, which took place in an appropriate dark cave, we met Alistair Halsby, lead game designer of Dark Messiah's multiplayer mode.
Yes, certainly. I mean, it was a very strong brand, and we could see the potential and opportunity, especially with that and the Source engine, and so we leapt at the chance. Certainly not short. So far it's been about a year or so, but that was working with an existing property. They already knew exactly what they wanted, and our task was quite clear. But I think we added a bit of imagination to exactly what we were going to provide. Which was a slightly more interesting game than possibly just taking what we had and making a standard deathmatch. A lot of our art guys went over there, talked to them. We use a huge number of their textures, their models, their sounds. Everything that we do is inspired by their stuff. So most of the time what we've tried to do is take their stuff and be as true as we possibly can to it, but still adapt it to make the best multiplayer game that we can. The core of the game is the Crusade mode, which is a little bit more complicated, a little bit more interesting. The whole point of this is that players pick classes, and then they gain experience as they play the game, and they keep that experience across multiple maps, which is a bit of an innovation. The maps are very large. We've designed this for 32 players simultaneously, so 2 teams of 16. So to have enough space for those players to actually work together and fight the enemy, we've had to make pretty much the largest maps that I've seen in the Source engine so far. There may in fact be others that are larger, I don't know. But no, we have made some really pretty sizable terrain. What we did for that is that we looked very carefully at all the skills and abilities that were available in single player, and we essentially teased them apart, and we looked at them saying, okay, well, how are we going to make characters out of these, and decide what sort of abilities, what's fun in single player, and then we'll focus a character on that aspect of the fun. So we've done a really powerful warrior, and a very powerful mage, and a very powerful assassin. One of the most interesting things is when we first started this, we only had 4 characters, and we said that the rogue style character, and he was going to be, you know, essentially a bit of sneaking and a bit of bow. But we pretty much early on realised that one of the things we didn't want to have was an invisible guy with a sniper weapon, because that was no fun at all. So we split him up into 2 different classes. So we went from 4 characters to 5. And the priestess, I should say, she's pretty much been added as a multiplayer character. Obviously in single player you heal yourself and you do nasty things to your enemies, but in multiplayer you have the ability to do that to your teammates, an enemy team as well. So she has a lot of abilities which are based around the teams. As we speak, and we've got 1,000 people doing the closed beta, and we're looking very carefully at the stats from that. We track the stats very carefully, so we know how many people have died from which spell, when they've died, how often they choose different spells, how they play. Everything is basically tracked. It's entirely possible that some of the community might surprise us and actually try and do some of the stuff that we haven't done. And also, the other thing is that hopefully we'll have an ability to see what the community actually thinks of the game. I mean, this is the process that's starting with the beta, and finding out what they find fun. Because we've produced a game which we think is fun, and we hope that other people will agree. But it really depends what they really enjoy, and hopefully the important thing going forward is to give people more of what they want.
Thank you, Alistair. Have a good trip home to England, and good luck for the end of the development. One last essential point remains: the music of Dark Messiah. Without appropriate music, no heroism, no great emotion. The Dark Messiah's composer is Sasha Dikisian, assisted by Chris Velasco. He was chosen by Ubisoft for specific reasons.
He's a very good author that we use in other game in Ubisoft. He did the music of Bleeding Angels. He's very talented, but it's not the only reason why we chose him, actually. He's talented, but also he loves video games, and that's extremely important. You could see that when he will be playing the game, he will, be living it, feeling the emotions involved, and then composing the right music for the right moment.
A classical orchestra and the choirs were recorded in Prague. The main originality of this music is the tribal instruments included in the orchestration, which gives a very specific tone to the Dark Messiah score. There's a different music at every level, but you can always recognize the Dark Messiah theme. And specific music has been composed for each character, with a possible evolution according to the choices made by the player. Dark Messiah is the fruit of fantastic teamwork and exploits the synergy between two great European development studios coupled with Valve's American competence. The goal seems to have been attained. Excellent immersion, very original gameplay. Those developers and Ubisoft have showed you how they worked to create your fun. So enjoy the game.